Okay, well, let's kick off. So firstly, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining. This session is being recorded as well. I know a number of people have asked for the recording after, so if you have missed the webinar today, please do not worry, we will be recording. So today's webinar is talking about some potential changes and a fairer private rented sector here in the UK. It's a topic that has been raised and lots of questions that have been asked, particularly to us over the last couple of weeks. So I think this will be a good way to share a bit more information for those who already own properties in the UK and for those landlords or potential investors that are thinking about buying a property in the UK. So if we flick onto the first slide. Great. So firstly, my name is Jordan Edwards. I am the director and owner of Edwards and Plumb Property. My wife, Lucy Plumb, who is going to be hosting most of the webinar, is also on the call today. And Lucy runs and operates our property management company. And she'll very much be talking through kind of who we are, what we do, and what are the takings and findings from the new white paper that has been released. So just a bit of background about us. We'll talk a little bit more about the business in a second, but Lucy and I have both worked in the property industry for many years. We help clients from overseas find and purchase properties in the UK and manage them as well. So very well versed in what is happening across the UK at the minute. So just to really talk about the agenda, I'll do a short introduction to Edwards and Plumb Property. So a little bit about the business, who we are, what we do. Lucy will then come on to talk about a fairer private rented sector. So what is the kind of the headlines of the paper that's been cased. The case for change. So actually, what are the changes? What's going to be happening? The goals and why these particular goals have been set. The main points within the white paper. So talking about the possible changes that will be happening. The key one is the timeline. So when are these changes potentially going to be happening and when do we think they're likely to happen? Is it still a good time to be a landlord? We've had a number of questions this week, so we'll talk a little bit more about what's happening there. We'll finish off with what the future holds. So where do we see it going and how does it really affect both tenants and landlords? And then at the end, we will have a Q&A. I'm assuming that part will be quite busy, given that we've already had a number of questions being messaged in this morning. So if we want to flick on to the introduction, and I'll just give you a quick bit of a recap or introduction to Edwards and Plumb Property. So as mentioned already, Lucy and I have both worked in the property industry for probably coming up about 20 years combined now. We have kind of expertise in both new build residential property and commercial property management. Lucy and I both moved back to the UK at the end of 2020, kind of mid kind of COVID, if you like, and we set up our business, having both worked in the industry for many years. But also we saw a bit of a shift in the market itself. So we found a lot of investors who I was working with particularly were now looking to explore different property opportunities and what we call physical property. So that's buying houses, buying properties, buying land across the UK. And one of the crucial parts within that is property management. And having lived and worked overseas and been buying properties and managing our own properties whilst we were living in Singapore for 5 years, we can very much appreciate the difficulties that people can face, particularly living outside of the UK, both from a time zone perspective and also having that help on the ground. So we set up our business on two sides, which both work hand in hand. The side I operate is very much about helping clients to find the perfect property across the UK. We are specialists in London, but we do some property hunting in all of the cities around the UK, Birmingham, Manchester, and so on and so forth. And we use our local knowledge and expertise to go out and find the perfect property which suits the client's needs. And then we help that individual purchase that property. Now, whether that's going to be for someone that's moving to the UK for self-use, or whether that's someone who's living in Singapore or Hong Kong that just wants to actually buy a property and operate that as an investment platform, we can do both. And many of the properties being promoted out in Asia, and having done it myself, are these new build off-plan developments. So we can help clients find those properties as well, but we are kind of experts, as mentioned, in kind of physical properties. The beauty being that if you are buying for an investment, Lucy will then take that property on and help you with finding your tenant, managing that property day to day, month to month, year to year. And we're very much there to help you from the moment you're thinking about buying a property right the way through until exiting and selling that property in the future. So it is a start to end process. So for anyone that's thinking about looking at buying a property or needs help finding a property or wants management of their property, may have a property already, but they don't like their property managing agent, then please do get in touch with us, and we can certainly have a conversation with you around our services and what we charge and how we're very, very different from our competitors. So if there's any other questions about the business at the end, as I said, there will be a Q&A. But what I'll do, I'll hand over to Lucy, who can talk a little bit more about some of the changes that will be happening, and then I'll resurface at the end and help ask some questions. Over to you, Lucy.
Thanks, Jordan. So good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today on the Renters Reform Bill White Paper, which has recently come out in June. Many of you will be aware of the changes, but for those of you that aren't, we'll obviously talk through them today. As Jordan's already mentioned, I'm the other half of Edwards and Plumb Property, and I head up the management and letting side of the business. So whilst it's been an eventful week here in the UK with the government restructure, for those of you that don't know, obviously Boris Johnson, our Prime Minister, is due to resign. That won't be until the autumn. However, he is looking to kind of reshuffle the cabinet at the moment, and obviously we'll have a new Prime Minister by the end of the year. So this presentation was made last week during the changes, so we have kind of tried to update it to reflect those changes. Not that anything has changed in the bill itself, but obviously with new politicians coming in and a new housing and community secretary, there may be some overall changes to the white paper itself. So obviously this webinar will benefit those existing landlords and those also looking to get into the market as well. So as Jordan's mentioned, we'll hold a Q&A at the end of the session, so feel free to submit your questions and we'll get them answered towards the end. So the first slide here is a fairer private rented sector. So again, this is about the white paper, and the picture on the right hand side of the screen is that of which was published in mid-June. So it's only been out a couple of weeks. The government has published its white paper to set out plans to change or reform the private rented sector and level up housing quality here in the UK. So this, just to point out as well, this session will very much focus on England. Scotland has its own rules, Wales has its own rules, so it is quite specific to England. However, there is an overall message for the UK. So the proposal obviously in the white paper that will form a new private renters bill. It's set to go to Parliament. So again, what this white paper is it's a proposal. Obviously, again, most of you will understand that that doesn't mean that it's law. And therefore, obviously, this will be going through the Royal Assent before it actually becomes legislation. So there's a 12-point action plan within that white paper. And for those of you who haven't had the joys of reading through the 86-page document, it details proposed changes which include the abolishment of the Section 21 notice, so the no fault eviction notice, no ban on children and pets, and obviously they're introducing a landlord portal. So the purpose-built student accommodation will also be exempt from some of these changes, and we'll come into more detail on that later. What we mean by that is that obviously you have purpose-built student accommodation, so i.e. your tower blocks, but anything like a converted Victorian house which houses students at present isn't exempt from these changes. So again, we'll talk about this in more detail, but it's a good idea for you to start thinking about your tenants and who you're actually looking to actually have as a tenant in your property. So again, just to reiterate, the white papers are policy documents and they're produced by the government that set out their proposals for future legislation. So again, not law at the moment, but these changes are definitely coming. So I'll move on to the next slide. So the case for change. So the overall message here is everybody deserves a secure and decent home. This is the objective set out by the UK government. The proposed for change in the private rental sector, again, is to ensure everybody is entitled to a secure and decent home. As many of you know, for those of you who do not follow UK politics, Michael Gove was dismissed by the current Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, last week, and Greg Clark has been appointed Secretary of Housing and Communities. So they have obviously ousted Michael Gove, and Greg Clark has come in. Now, what that means for this white paper and bill is that we may see changes over the coming months, even years, in how they go about implementing these changes. So obviously, again, with the future leadership, we are hoping that Greg Clark continues his appointment as the Housing Community Secretary, although I do have my doubts about his appointment to lead. And we're obviously hoping to know about this in coming weeks as well. However, obviously with the reshuffle with the UK government, everything is very unstable at the moment, and it does look as if there'll be more changes coming, not only to the leader of the housing and communities sector, but also for the white paper itself. So the white paper obviously isn't going to drastically change, but there will be points added, I assume. This is our assumption at the moment, that there will be changes to the white paper as it is. So let's just move on to the next slide there. So the ultimate goal, obviously, again, is to ensure all landlords take a proactive approach to property management. So this is where all the acronyms come in. So you're levelling up, your renters reform, a private or fairer private rented sector. And what do they really mean? So we know that obviously in life there are good and bad people, and the same can be said about landlords. As an agent, obviously we want to work with landlords who understand that a tenant deserves a secure and decent home. And obviously we want landlords to buy properties that are suitable for rental purpose. And whilst this doesn't mean the newest kitchen or bathroom or technology even in the house, this does mean ensuring that homes again are safe and secure. So that's a message that we will reiterate during this call. So we usually ask every landlord to ask themselves, would you yourself live in the property? What would you change to the property? And what is your plans for repairs and maintenance? And again, this is the commitment that is being spread here by the government. So again, what repairs and maintenance would you do to the property, and how long would you think of renting the property for? So what's your ultimate goal, and how long do you see yourself renting the property for? The commitment, obviously detailed in the white paper, already highlights what I would estimate is around 80% of landlords already doing this and already doing their job as being good landlords. So ensuring your tenant has a safe home and that you're not illegally evicting your tenants because they've complained about your property. Say it requires repairs and maintenance. You obviously won't then be able to evict that tenant because they've made a complaint. And I think that's a very good, whilst that's in place at the moment, I also think that's a very good step to sort of ridding the rogue landlords out there here in the UK. So everybody will need to follow a stricter process. And then on the other side of that, obviously, it'll also ensure a smoother process to evict nuisance tenants. So any tenants that fall into rent arrears or cause antisocial behaviour, all of these types of tenants, again, they'll be punished for rent arrears, for your antisocial behaviours. So it's not all one-sided for landlords, and it's certainly not all one-sided for tenants either. There is going to be a fairer system in place, and hopefully some positive changes as well. We want all of you to be able to see the positives that's going to come out of this, this white paper, and hopefully this session, so that you understand them in a little bit more detail. So just to run through the commitment again, so all tenants should have access to a good quality, safe and secure home. Again, reiterated in this throughout these slides here. So tenants should be able to treat their house as their home and be empowered to challenge poor practice. So again, that comes into your maintenance, your repairs, your if that person doesn't feel secure because the front door is broken and the landlord is refusing to fix it. All of these things can be challenged, and they will be challenged by a first tier tribunal. And that will become open to landlords and tenants as and when this white paper becomes legislation. Landlords and tenants should be supported by a system that enables effective resolution of issues. So at the moment we have the tenancy deposit scheme, but again, that only really comes into effect at the end of a tenancy when a landlord is looking to make deductions from a deposit. So this system will enable both parties to have a mediator involved whilst the tenancy is active. So that will mean your tenant coming to you with a dispute, for example, the shower is broken or the shower's leaking. The landlord is saying that it's the tenant's responsibility and that the tenant has broken it. And therefore, if nobody can come to a conclusion, there will be a dispute resolution system there in place to help deal with those problems. And the last point on there is that local councils should have strong and effective enforcement tools to crack down on poor practice. So again, at the moment, the legislation is that, or the law is that you can, your tenant can inform the council of problems with your property, and then obviously that will have an effect on your evictions, maybe even your rent. So there is a thing in place already for a process in place already for obviously local councils to be involved, but the government want to strengthen that. And again, so that's something that landlords should be aware of, because they will be obviously again on tenant side if the landlord is refusing to repair or maintain the home to make it secure and safe. So the next one is the main points, so the 12-point action plan. So we've only selected a few points from this action plan, which I believe are the most important. Again, if you'd like to read through those 12-point action plan, we can send you a link after this call. But the first action, for example, on the plan is that, again, everybody deserves a secure and decent home. So whilst that isn't like an objective, it's the main point of the plan. So we've removed that because obviously we've already spoken about them in those slides there. So again, it's an 86-page document. Like I say, we can send you the link if you'd like to have a read through. But obviously we are just highlighting some of the main changes in the private rented sector. So your abolishment of Section 21, which is also known as a no-fault eviction. Again, these will be abolished. So what does this really mean? So obviously allowing a landlord to seek possession of a property let on an assured short-hold tenancy on a 2-month notice. This will be a new grounds for possession. So this will ensure tenants obviously can't be evicted unlawfully because they have complained about the property needing repairs, or that the landlord has simply woken up one day and has decided that they want to evict their tenant for no reason, which is it's not very common, but there are landlords out there that do wish to remove people from properties because they feel like it, because they're not getting on with them, because they're making ridiculous comments about the property or whatever it might be. So obviously there will be new grounds for possession. And whilst this sounds very one of the more dramatic changes to the sector, there are obviously positive changes. So there'll be a new ground for possession, which will include landlords wanting to move back into the property if they wish to sell it, or if they wish to move into it with either themselves or their immediate family would like to move into it too. So obviously the sector believes that the new grounds will maybe come with a loophole, because there's nothing really stopping a landlord evicting a tenant and saying that they will sell the property, or that they want to move back into it themselves, and then obviously in a month or 2 months' time changing their mind. So obviously the government has set out in this white paper that they will not they'll not tolerate any loopholes, and that obviously any loopholes that are found within the paper will not be tolerated. So I suspect, and whilst again this isn't included in the legislation or the white paper at the moment, I suspect that if you try and evict a tenant with the purpose of selling the property or moving back into it, that you will either, and then obviously you don't follow through with that, you will be either given a penalty, or you won't be able to move another tenant in for maybe 6 months. And obviously that's going to be more interesting to see how that plays out when this bill finally becomes legislation, because they do need something there in writing to kind of avoid that loophole or that problem that they may come across. So the second one, again, probably one of the more important ones, is to replace the current structure of an assured short-hold tenancy with a system of periodic tenancies. So what this means is, obviously, hopefully all of you will know what a periodic tenancy is, but for those of you who don't, a periodic tenancy means that there is no fixed term or end date. So tenants must give 2 months notice to leave. And when your tenancy runs for a periodic tenancy, there's no statutory period. So there's no fixed term and no end date. So what this means for landlords is that obviously tenants can serve 2 months notice to leave the property. There will still be the rule, as there is now, for tenants not being able to leave the property within the first 6 months. So there will be kind of a statutory period they're not going to name it that, but there will be a statutory period of 6 months whereby nobody obviously is allowed to leave the property unless obviously there's grounds for possession, or if the landlord or tenant comes to an agreement for them to leave. So again, whilst this is no different for somebody that has a 6 to 12 month break clause in their contract, it could mean in the long run that landlords are paying more for tenant fine fees, for letting fees. So careful consideration should be taken when you're selecting your tenant. I think this is the key message to come out of this change in the white paper itself. So on that as well, landlords at the moment, and again, remember, this is a white paper, it's not law, it's not legislation. And I know this has been challenged by a number of people on the board, and people obviously make suggestions to the government for these changes to be implemented. At the moment, landlords will not have the same right, so they won't be given, they won't be allowed to give the 2 months notice like tenants are, and that's all due down to the fact that a lot of tenants, obviously what they're sort of seeing with the change in dynamic and the change in people renting properties is that tenants do move around, they do, and they want them to have that flexibility. But then again, it also needs to be fair from a landlord point of view. So I think there's changes coming in that sector there, or in that point in the bill, should I say. So the third point is the reform grounds for possession. So again, we've already touched base on this one around the Section 21 notice being abolished. But there'll obviously be new grounds for possession for repeat serious arrears, so rent arrears, so that obviously eviction can be mandatory. At the moment, the law suggests that it can actually be a provisionary, what's a law, if you like, where a tenant obviously has been in the last 2 months is rent arrear. It's actually discretionary. So that's the current law, but they're looking to change that to be mandatory in the future, which is again a positive change for landlords, because nobody wants anybody sitting in their property for months and months. I think many of you may have seen it or heard about it during COVID. Many people weren't able to pay their rent, many tenants, and therefore they were just allowed to sit in the property until they could get to court, or the landlord could get to court and actually finally evict them. So there'll be a stronger grounds for possession around that. And again, obviously, as we mentioned, for anybody looking to sell their home or again, move into it themselves. So for anybody that is thinking of investing in a property and then wants to move into it a couple of years down the line, again, there should be no reason that you can't do that. Obviously, just going through the right channels to ensure that that tenant is legally evicted. So permitting rent increases once a year. So in the current circumstances, it's obviously common for landlords to increase the rent when a tenancy agreement changes from a statutory to a periodic tenancy. And again, that periodic tenancy is when the fixed term has ended. So that's usually after about 12 months. And tenants have always had the ability to change rent increases. So obviously this is not a new change. However, the government have made it clear that it is more accessible for tenants to challenge excess rent increases. So I know that in our tenancy agreements themselves, that most of the rent increases can't be done more than once per year anyway. I think that's only fair. And it obviously avoids landlords putting rents up to, again, try and entice a tenant to leave. I think that's, again, what the system is trying to scrap here. So again, a very simple one, no ban on pets and children. I'm hoping that most of you have thought carefully about this anyway. But a landlord obviously will no longer be able to say no to pets or children living in their property unless there is exceptional circumstances. There is talks around a pet policy that should be taken, or a pet policy or an insurance that should actually be taken out by tenants when they sign the tenancy agreement. And also amending the current tenant fee acts. So again, whilst this isn't law, this is just our assumptions, and this is kind of what we've heard through the grapevine from all different kind of boards and property experts, is that again, tenants taking out insurance to cover your home for any damage caused by that pet. Now, this would mean amending the Tenant Fee Act. So there's a lot of work behind the scenes that needs to go into this, and real kind of thought and consideration from the government in order to make these changes. But I know that it's not just going to be a blanket ban on children and pets without some thought process going into the fact that pets may damage properties, and therefore without using the deposit, obviously at the end of the tenancy, the security deposit, there should be something in place whereby landlords or tenants can rectify those that damage to the property immediately, rather than, as I say, waiting to the end of the tenancy. So again, there's more detail required on that, and obviously when it's published, we'll have more information on that, but that's kind of the way that it is going at the moment, or that's what they're looking to achieve. So again, and with pets, I'll just reiterate, obviously times have changed. We all respect that pets have a social and emotional aspect on all of our lives. From an emotional point of view, people have some emotional support animals. And really, you're opening up your property to more tenants if you are looking to rent to people with pets. So again, there's more to follow on that, but that's one of the main points that they are trying to implement. And the last point is the landlord property portal. It's also going to be known as a landlord register. It will be a digital platform, much like many of you, if you know what an MOT is for your car. We all have them. They're all registered to our names. They're all held on, all of the data is held on a central system. And obviously what this landlord portal will do is collect information for each property, its condition, how many properties the landlord owns, so how many properties are within their portfolio. And because obviously there's no central system for it at the moment, sometimes tenants are left scratching their heads saying, well, how do I get in contact with my landlord? Or if they've moved and the tenancy agreement, obviously that was written up 12 months ago, doesn't now reflect the new information. And so therefore they're trying to make a landlord register or a property portal, as they're calling it, to ensure that all of this data is held centrally. And they're hoping, and again, I'll come on to this in the timeline slide. However, there is an interest to put compliance certificates on the portal itself. Again, there's no central system to collect this information. It's just a kind of word from either the landlord or the agent that these checks have been carried out. But again, it will be uploading your gas safety certificates, your Legionella certificates, your electrical safety certificates as well. So again, that will all be included on there, and that will obviously help local councils to take enforcement against private landlords obviously not complying with the regulations. We have been informed again by the board that we have been given, we will as agents be given access to the landlord portals and the landlord register, obviously providing GDPR protection of data allows it. Will obviously your agent, or we as your agent, will take care of that for you and make sure that all of that information is updated on your behalf. So I think that covers the main points there from that 12-point action plan. Like I say, we can provide you with the link to the 12 points if you really wanted to read through them. But as I say, it is an 86-page document. So we're hoping that we've covered most of the kind of questions and highlighted the main points of that plan. So let's talk about the timeline here. So obviously the exact timeline for implementing the reform is not yet known. So the white paper proposals, as we mentioned before, are a long way off becoming law. The parliamentary process, it's never speedy here in the UK. There's obviously a lot of detail that goes into not only writing these white papers, but again, making sure they're fair on both sides, and that again lots of people are involved in making sure that once they're implemented that they actually work. So we don't expect to see any of this becoming law for at least 18 to 24 months. Again, at this point we assume that it will be phased in, and that being that the easier changes, such as the changing of periodic tenancies, or from fixed term to periodic tenancies, that's quite an easy change. So we assume that that would be one of the first things to change. So again, nothing speedy about it. It's not going to be tomorrow. Let's get these changes in place. They obviously need to give landlords and agents time to adapt to these changes. So any new changes that are made, obviously will the government have promised a 6-month notice before those changes are implemented. Again, there will be a transition period. So we'll see new laws affecting all new tenancies signed after the date that the Act actually becomes law. Then 12 months for all other tenancies to catch up, and then that's obviously binding on them too. So all new tenancies will become periodic when the government give them 6 months notice, and existing tenancies again will be approximately 18 months notice, given the time obviously it takes to change the process and the policies. And then lastly, obviously the resident portal is likely, as we've already mentioned, to take longer to bring into practice. So that will likely be the last thing to be implemented, because I imagine, again, there's no system that's already in place, and that a whole new sort of central data system will be required to be built in order to hold and secure that data. Let's just move on to the next slide. So, is it still a good time to be a landlord? Landlords, I really think from this white paper, should have nothing to fear. Most are adaptable, and obviously the changes are positive. We think that none of them really are too discerning to landlords to actually get into the market. Again, your letting agent, they will be there to support you through the change and offer any advice or questions you may have with regards to your recent changes. they'll be the forefront of all of these changes. So again, if you've got a good agent, you should never have to worry about any of these changes actually coming into practice. Despite obviously the proposed changes, I think it is still a good time to invest. And I think Jordan will come on to this later, but he will agree. Again, the number of properties available to rent through letting agents halved in March between 2019 and 2022. So more landlords are getting out of the market, more landlords are selling up. That means that obviously then there's less investment properties out there, less rental properties out there, and therefore it means obviously a smaller rental market, higher demand, more people wanting to rent. I can only see that being a good thing. And obviously, if you are looking to get into the market, whilst your rental yields might not be high, think about it again as a long-term investment. I know Jordan will talk about that maybe more at the end as well. So over half of rental properties sold in March this year alone did not return to the private rented market. Again, only a good thing for people already in the market or new people that are looking to invest. So again, the UK property market has always been a good investment. It grows year on year, and there is no sort of slowdown. We don't have enough houses here in the UK, and therefore they're always looking for ways to build more houses, buy more land, etc. So there'll always be a good time to invest here in the UK. And obviously, again, before you invest, check your rental yield. The market itself, the private rented sector or the lettings market predicts that the rent collection service, so if you are on a rent collection basis only, whereby you don't have your property fully managed, there is a prediction that this will be removed by letting agents due to the compliance risks that are involved in managing your property. With this new landlord portal, we suspect that many property agents will actually remove just the rent collection service that they offer in order to kind of minimize risk to them. Because they will still have to complete the kind of admin of uploading all of those compliance certificates and all of the landlord information to the portals themselves. So again, there's talk of that. Whether that happens, we don't really know. So let's just round this up, and I'll then hand back to Jordan, what the future really holds. So the government is obviously mindful that it's vital to the private rented sector, that the eventual legislation doesn't deter landlords from the sector. So we've already mentioned this before. The government obviously wants there to be a wider rental market. People will and always, there is a new shift in government here in the UK where it's become generation rent becomes generation buy, but they are aware that that isn't always feasible for everybody. So whilst they're trying to sort of get everybody away from renting and obviously buying, people rent for all different kinds of reasons, and that be they want to be in London, for example, and they can't afford to buy in central London. They may be somewhere nearby where they work. It may just be that they're on a secondment, they're away for a year or 2 years on business. So there's all these things whereby the UK government isn't trying to deter investment properties or buy-to-let properties, but they are aware that obviously with these changes, they don't want to cause more landlords to exit out of the private rental sector. So this will lead to obviously existing shortages of rental homes. We've already mentioned that. And obviously, whilst there's a cost of living crisis here in the UK at the moment, they really don't want to disturb the the people that are already in the current rental private rented sector, because obviously that then means that more tenants are being evicted, higher prices with moving costs and rentals and everything that comes with it. So they are aware that they do need to tread very carefully with ensuring that landlords are staying in the sector. So again, what we've mentioned time and time again in this presentation is that everybody is obviously required to meet the decent home standards, and every tenant is should have the access to a secure and decent home. And obviously, again, you'll be required, or your agent working on behalf of a landlord will be required to submit evidence of this onto a new property portal. And that again will be your compliance certificates, your inventory checks to show the condition of the property. All of these things will kind of be captured in this portal. So my main point that I will end with, well, two main points that I'll end with on there. Think about your long-term investment goals and put together a business plan. If you're considering changing your property or improving its interior, maybe you need thinking of getting a new bathroom or a new kitchen, it might be a good idea to start thinking about having a plan in place for those changes to be made. Obviously, we understand that these things don't come cheap, and it might be good to think ahead of the game. Things are only increasing. We've got a shortage of labourers, materials. And so again, if you're thinking about making improvements to your property, have a think about when that might be and put together a plan. Obviously, as well as adding in value to your overall investment and attracting more tenants, obviously you'll then gain a higher rental yield from more attractive properties. People will be willing to pay more. And obviously, again, in the long run, most bathrooms, kitchens last 10 years. So it is, when you break it down, there is a real kind of focus on how much really it costs you, say, per day or per week or per month in your overall rental yield. So again, something to focus on there. And whilst this isn't included in the bill, I will mention it because it should be something that all landlords are aware of. And these are the new energy performance ratings, so EPC changes that are due to come into effect by 2025. So again, each landlord will be required to make improvements on their property for heating the house, and obviously making sure that it's cool during the summer as well. So I think the cap on that at the moment is around the £3,500 mark. That would be what the government expect you to spend on updating the property if it falls below band C. So again, all of these things to think that you should consider if, again, you've got a rental property and it is that D or below EPC rating at the moment. So I will leave you with that. That comes, I'm finished my section. So Jordan, if you, I don't know if we've got any questions or yeah, that have come through. I think you might be on mute. Jordan, you're on mute. There you go.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Good. Okay. Well, firstly, thanks, Lucy, for going through that. To give a short summary, if you like, from my side, I think potentially a lot of people are seeing this as a negative or have some concerns around, is this going to be more difficult for me as being a landlord? Is it, is this not a good time for me to be investing? Are they making it more difficult for me to make money as an investor or a landlord? I think the key takeaway for me personally, and being a landlord ourselves, is that the system is just being reformed to make it better. And I think the rules aren't massively changing, but they are changing in a way that I think it will make it better and a bit more structured. As we know, the property industry in the UK, unlike investing with a bank or financial institution which has heavy regulations, the property market doesn't really. There's a lot of guidance, but there's no one kind of really super enforcing rules. So for me, I think this will make things a bit more structured. And the critical bit for us, and not a sales pitch to use our management company, but ultimately I think it's about having a good property manager and finding a good tenant. And it's not all about the person who's going to pay you the most amount of rent, or the person that wants to pay you all the rent up front. It's about that vetting process and trying to get a really good tenant and someone that's going to sit in that property for a number of years, rather than potentially in the long term having potential issues. So yeah, I would say these are definitely protocols to make things better, not to hinder being a landlord, in sort of short summary.
Jordan, sorry, just to jump in there, I've got a question from Kit. I don't know if you've managed to look at them on the chat.
Yes, I saw a couple coming through.
Okay, I'll just read through them because I can answer one of them, which is from Kit. So, hi Kit. Can I still add a break clause into the assured short hold tenancy, or AST? I suspect break clauses will go away. And the reason for that is because obviously each tenancy will now become periodic, meaning that the tenant can give 2 months notice after the initial 6 months, but a landlord should look at it as though they're in it for the long run. And I think that's what the government is trying to achieve with this, is that there will be longer rental terms, and obviously to deter landlords from sort of getting rid of tenants or asking them to leave. That said, it's not set in stone, it's not cast iron. There are still a lot of changes and kind of points that need to be made to the government in this bill. So whilst I think break clauses will be ousted, there's no complete answer to that at the moment. I can only imagine the reason for break clauses being included is that maybe one is allowed after 12 months by the landlord to kind of make it fair in from a legal point of view as well, that if a tenant can leave after giving 2 months notice, then why can't a landlord also ask someone to leave within 12 months? But again, it's so up in the air at the moment. They've as with most governments, they write a paper and kind of think about all of the points or all of the kind of detail that goes into it afterwards. So I hope that's kind of answered the question or given you some thought about it.
Just to add to that, and what I would say, and having done this for many years, it's quite uncommon nowadays to have break clauses in there unless there's a very specific reason. But you wouldn't now really take out a 12 months tenancy and say, I want a 6 month break clause just in case I decide I don't want to live there.
I agree.
That's quite a rare,
tenants are more likely to ask for the break clause, and they won't obviously be required to ask for a break clause anymore because they will legally be allowed to leave.
Exactly. So I don't think it's really something.
It's quite rare that a landlord would, be asking for a break clause, but I hope that kind of sums that up a little bit for you.
Good. There was a couple of other questions in the chat as well. Do you want to go through those?
So sorry, just from Kit again. Sign an AST with a tenant in January 2022. AST effective Feb 2022. Rent is under market. What can the landlord do? So it all depends on your tenancy agreement as well, Kit. See what your tenancy agreement states. If it states that obviously no rent increases within the first year, that obviously means that you'll need to wait till Feb 23. And obviously if because our tenancy agreements are in line with the price index. So again, check your tenancy agreement is all I would say to you. It really is heavily reliant on what is worded in your tenancy agreement and what you can do. But I'll happily look at it for you if you want me to, just to see what is included in that agreement, and I'll let you know how you can proceed.
Good. There's one from
We've
Veronica.
got one. Yep. Sorry, we've got two from Veronica Chan. So, hi, Veronica. I wish to terminate the tenancy agreement with the existing tenant, and I'm going to give the tenant 2 months' notice before the break clause. Can the tenant refuse to leave by claiming that they have yet found their home? Yes, they can. So the tenant, so you've got a couple of things here. You can't evict a tenant within the first 6 months of a tenancy agreement, or within the first 6 months of them moving into your home. Secondly, sorry, the tenancy agreement with the existing tenant, I'm going to give 2 months notice before the break clause. Okay, so again, if there's a break clause and it's after the 6 months, yes, you, depending again how your tenancy agreement is worded, and if there's a break clause after the 6 months, then yes, you can absolutely use that clause within the contract to ask the tenant to leave. You will at the moment be required to, or your letting agent will be required to provide a Section 21 notice. We've spoken about this in detail, but they will obviously still be valid. And that will mean that the tenant is asked to leave on a certain date. They don't have to legally, if they haven't found a new home, move out of your property. What happens after that date is that if you do really need them out and want them out, and they haven't left, we always try to be a mediator between, as an agent and a tenant and a landlord. So we ask them when they are thinking of leaving, what's their and obviously if they're paying your rent, there should be no problem there. Most people can come to a mutual agreement about when they are going to leave. If they don't leave, your Section 21 notice is still valid after your after the end date. So what you can then do is start court proceedings. Most people don't like to go down that route because it can be resolved between both parties. However, once that 2 months Section 21 notice is up, you can, and they haven't left, you can then start the court proceedings to evict them by through the courts. And sorry, and a follow-up question again from Veronica: can I increase rent in the midst of agreement, assuming the tenancy wishes to stay? The tenant wishes to stay. Again, as I've mentioned, it's all the wording. It all boils down to the wording in your contracts, in your tenancy agreement. So again, happy to read through them if you wanted to send them through. But if your contract states that there is increases once a year, or again in line with the index, then again it all depends on what your contract says. If it says nothing, then yeah, absolutely. But obviously you're always going to have trouble with anybody. Obviously, again, as I mentioned in the call before, if you're thinking of increasing rents every 6 months and they're not in line with kind of local market, the tenant does have the opportunity to go to a first tier tribunal and challenge that, whether that be obviously accepted is a risk that you take, but if they find it should be lower than obviously their initial payment, then you're kind of running into problems. So I would always try and be fair in rents that you charge, and obviously just check the local market, surrounding areas, to see again what's out there, and see if it's kind of in line with the current market.
Yeah, just to kind of really short summarize of that question, I would say, look, there's no issue with a landlord increasing rents on a property, but it has to be fair and it has to be in line. You can't say, my rent's 1,500 now and I want to increase it to 3,000 because
Yeah.
it's just absolutely ridiculous. But you can take the advice of your letting agent and they might turn around and say, actually, 2-bedroom apartments in Canary Wharf are renting for 1,750.
Yeah.
Therefore, in the property's condition, we can probably rent this for 1,650 or there or thereabouts. So that won't change as such, but it's going to be fair and in line. I think that's the critical kind of response is, yes, you can do it. Obviously, whether it's written into the tenancy agreement, but it's got to be fair and kind of in keeping. You can't just double the rent and hope, you know, that someone will either leave or they'll question paying it, because that's basically not okay.
And that may also invalidate your Section 21 notice as well, because if you start to try and, as you say, find a loophole to get those tenants out, that may invalidate the eviction notice. So again, there's quite a few grounds that you have to tread very carefully on around how you remove a tenant from your property. But no, in short, they don't need to leave. And again, you can increase the rent. That's absolutely fine. If obviously the tenant wants to stay as well.
Right, I've got a couple of questions that have been texted in as well. I'm conscious that we've been going an hour, so we maybe only take 1 or 2 more, and then we can basically contact everyone after if there's.
I will read one from Henry just because I've got it here on the screen, and then
sure.
So is there any regulation on the hi Henry, sorry. Is there any regulation on the rate of rental increment related to inflation rate or other factors? Could you answer that? Or
no, well again, there's no set guideline, but you know, it's all about, as I mentioned just a minute ago, you can't just say my rent's now 1,000 and I want to increase it to 2,000, because that's clearly rents haven't gone up, you know, double in the last year since the tenancy agreement started. So there will be a case of looking at other properties in the area, looking at inflation. You know, that they'll take a view, and we will give you some advice. We believe we can increase the rent between £50 and £100. You know, that's a guidance.
That's your normal increments. It's 3% usually against the index. It's again, it all depends. Just to reiterate, it all depends on the wording in your contract. Is the short answer, really. So if you wanted to send through, we can certainly give you some advice on what you do. But again, it could be seen unfair, and the tenant is well within their right to take you as the landlord to the first tier tribunal to challenge that rent.
Okay, good. I think we've covered that. Right, we've got 2 more, and then I think we'll end it there, because otherwise we'll be answering questions forever, because I've had 7 come in whilst the call's been going on.
Okay.
So there's a question here, and it says, will the changes mean it becomes more complicated to own a buy-to-let property in the UK? Do you want me to answer that? Yeah, so the long and short is no. Look, this is not a negative, and I think there's a lot of stigma around it, saying that there's making it more difficult to be a landlord, and all of the, you know, it's all going to be in favor of the tenant. That simply isn't the case. As Lucy mentioned in the call, this is trying to make it fairer for both tenants and landlords. But this is not going to devalue property prices. This is not going to make it more difficult for you to buy a property. There's no laws changing on who can buy and what can buy and taxation. So the simple answer is, you know, property is a long-term investment, regardless of where you're buying it in the UK, whether it's London, Birmingham, Manchester, and you should continue to invest or buy properties if you're interested in property and you like the UK system. And we're obviously big advocates of that. And I think, you know, this is purely designed to make sure that you're offering a good quality property and you're getting in a good quality tenant, and it's fair on both parties. So yes, the UK is still a fantastic place to buy compared to other places, and you know, the investment opportunity is still really there. And don't forget that, you know, buying property is a longer term investment. It's not a buy and flip it in a year because of the tax. We would always suggest that it's going to be a 5 to 10 year hold. So as long as you're committed for that long, the changes that the government will implement, and there will be continued changes, I'm sure, over the next 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years, as there always are with things like inheritance tax and stamp duty and all the other wonderful things that come along with buying property in the UK. But it is not a deterrent. This is just making the process simplified, easier, more straightforward, and more fair.
I think you can kind of see from the statistics that we showed on the screen earlier, I think a lot of landlords have panicked, and that and maybe even longer term landlords, and they've got out of the sector without really thinking about what it means. So there is no need to panic. As I said earlier, landlords are very adaptable, letting agents are very adaptable. There's a lot that can be said about both parties, and as I say, I can only assume that the changes are positive, and that they won't have too much impact on the sector.
Yeah, and then we'll just do one final question here then. So it says, is there a specific type of property which would be better for me to buy for an investment to get a better tenant? I mean, do you want me to answer that, or do you want to answer that? I'll probably go first. So the answer is no. I mean, whether you're buying an apartment versus a flat or versus a student property, they are all going to offer something very different. For example, if you buy student property, generally the rental yield is a lot higher, but the long-term gain of that property is lower. And obviously the cost of maintaining that property, because students are hard-wearing, is higher, versus buying a property in London, a house in London that you have a family in it. So the tenant profile is very different, but it's not one is better than the other. That is very dependent on what your goal is. Whether you're looking to buy and rent to a family, whether you're going to buy and rent for 2 years and then move into it, or whether you want just a pure investment and you want to look at one of the northern cities. So, we would have that conversation, or I would help you decide as part of my consultation, is to kind of guide you and steer you of what you should be buying. But certainly, again, no, the answer is this is not a hindrance. This is just making sure that the quality of the property that you're offering has to be of a standard, and we have to vet the tenant properly and make sure those two things marry up. Was that fair?
Yeah.
Good. Right. Okay. Any others, Luce, or should we finish?
I've got no others. No.
No. Okay. Fine. Well, look. Just a short summary from us. Firstly, thanks to everyone for joining. Appreciate you taking your time this afternoon and evening, if you're based in Asia, to listen to us. I completely agree. It sounds like there's quite a lot of content in there, but we've tried to simplify today just to give you the headline material. This currently is not legal, so these are proposed changes. Nothing has changed yet. So if you are currently renting properties and you are a landlord of a property in the UK, do not worry. If you have any questions, more specific questions, we can always pick up and have a separate call. If you currently have a managing agent looking after your property, you can always speak to them for some guidance around what the changes mean directly for you or your specific property. Finally, if you want to discuss anything property related, whether it's buying a property, whether you've got family moving to the UK, whether you're looking for property management services or estate agency services, you can talk to myself or Lucy. Our email and telephone numbers are on the screen, or you can also visit us at edwardsandplumbproperty.com. And we'll close the webinar there. Thank you for joining. Have a wonderful evening, and we will send the recording round over the next couple of days. And feel free to get in contact with us if there's any further questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to add to that, guys, thanks again for joining. I hope you found it helpful. Like I said, it's being recorded, so you can go back and watch it in your own time. We will look to hold more of these sessions. So if you've got any friends or family or anybody that colleagues that you think might be interested, we will certainly hold more of these sessions as and when new either legislation proposals or even law comes into practice, because, as I say, the goalposts change from last week. Changes are happening weekly, whether they be minor or major. So we'll look to group that together and do some more of these sessions in the near future. But thank you all again for joining, and we'll leave it there. Have a lovely rest of your day or evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.